Washington Journal continues.
We will be talking shortly with Harry Smith of NBC News. He has a new special for CNBC that aired last night on the network. It will re-air tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, looking at Colorado and its legal marijuana sales made possible by a new law that went into effect this year. Here's a little bit of Marijuana in America, Colorado Pot Rush.
Come along on a ride with us. We're about to take you to a place unlike any other.
Let's go.
All right.
Where marijuana is legal and the scent of money is in the air.
First time I've smoked a joint in a long time.
Well, take it easy. It hits really smooth.
And I no longer have to feel like a criminal.
That's right.
I'm not doing anything wrong.
Kevin and Rachel are pot tourists, oh so happy to be a mile high.
Welcome to Colorado.
Joining us from New York this morning, Harry Smith, NBC News correspondent. Mr. Smith, let's just begin with what led you to this story and to put together this special.
First state in the nation to make recreational marijuana legal, let alone the first place in the world to say this is something we're going to do in a legal way. A lot of people go to Amsterdam and use marijuana or eat the little cookies and what have you, and that's not actually a legal trade. That's the nation of the Netherlands sort of turning their shoulder and saying it's okay. This is the first place in the world where recreational sale of marijuana is actually legal.
What did you learn?
How much time do you have? That the size of the business is so much larger than I think anybody even anticipated. The state of Colorado came out last week and said they think in the fiscal year to come, they think the marijuana business in Colorado alone is going to be worth $1 billion. This is a phenomena that's taking that state by storm, and if you pick up the front page of your New York Times this morning, it's moving state by state by state. It'll likely be on the ballots this year in Alaska, and it's probably coming soon to Rhode Island. Lots and lots of states are talking about it, not only from the standpoint of legalization, from the standpoint of a libertarian sort of freedom issue, but also in terms of revenue that states think they can collect as a result of taxing legal marijuana.
What do you think these states that are looking at this can learn from Colorado and from the piece that you put together?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time with Governor John Hickenlooper, who's a pretty smart guy, and he calls what's going on in Colorado a great social experiment. And it really is that. And if it is a social experiment, then Colorado is the petri dish on which all these other states should be keeping an eye. And one of the things he said at the National Governors Conference in Washington, D.C. just this past weekend is he urged everyone to just take it slow. This is uncharted territory. And I think, if states and legislatures are sitting there seeing dollar signs, what no one really knows is the cost of this. What's the social cost? Are people going to be driving high? Are addiction rates going to go up? What is the cost of having a society that says this is something that's okay with us? Nobody really knows what the answers to any of those questions are yet.
Well, let's listen to a little bit of what the governor had to say to you when you sat down with him for the CNBC special.
That kind of branding where people start saying, oh, you guys are stoners, that could be terrible for us.
Are you concerned that Colorado becomes known as the stoner state?
We've had 3 new Fortune 500 companies, global headquarters here in the last 4 years. We're very proud of that. Some employers are going to, think twice.
So these are the 2 cabinets we have for recreational.
The governor is acutely aware that being the first on this path means his state has no blueprint to follow.
I think most of us recognize that this is going to be one of the great social experiments of the next century.
It really is an experiment.
It is. I spent 16 years in the restaurant business, and it's like opening a brand new restaurant. But just opening and having a great first few weeks, that's...
So, Harry Smith, what are they doing as they undertake this so-called experiment? How are they going about it?
Well, the business is highly regulated. There are a lot of bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through in order to go into the marijuana business. Every single plant that's grown out there, for instance, has a radio tag and it's tagged and accounted for. So if you think, okay, well, I'm going to start this business over here and sell some over on the side, every plant is accounted for from seed until sale. So it's a very highly regulated business. They're doing their best to get control of what is this kind of exploding geyser, so to speak. And you know, as he says, everything they do is they're thinking, trying to think out of the box and saying, how do we get control of this and make sure this works out for everybody's benefit, or at least to as many people's benefit as possible.
How do you go about setting up a business there? What is the cost for getting to be part of this industry there? And
yeah,
then, what are the profits?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, the profits are phenomenal. We talked to one of the guys in the special we talked to was a lawyer, and one of his law partners came up to him a couple of years ago and said, why don't we open up a law shop that only deals with the marijuana trade? And that in and of itself is probably a pretty lucrative idea. And this guy said, why don't we just cut to the chase? Why don't we go into the marijuana business? I asked him what it was like being, you know, what's it like being in the marijuana business? And he says, it's like holding a winning lottery ticket. The people who are in this and know what they're doing are making money. They're making serious money. But I think that also the people who don't know what they're doing or don't have business acumen are going to be weeded out fairly quickly.
So there will be losers in this.
Of course there will. Just like any other business proposition, the people who know what they're doing and have some clue will continue to grow and prosper, and the ones who have less of a clue will probably get gobbled up by the ones who do.
Harry Smith, describe what you saw in Colorado on the business landscape, all the different businesses that are trying to be a part of this movement.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning because one of the things that I was completely unaware of, and listen, for those of us on the East Coast who have not been exposed to medical marijuana, medical marijuana in its own way, at least from my perspective, is a sort of de facto legalization, because if you want to get medical marijuana, it's very easy to get a prescription for it. This is not a big hurdle you have to go over. So states with medical marijuana already have almost a kind of de facto legalization. So back here where we are in New York, there's nothing even close. There's nothing within hundreds and hundreds of miles that we can use as a sort of example. So you go out there and it's going into like some kind of a brave new world. And one of the things that I was stunned by was the fact that people aren't just smoking marijuana; they're using all kinds of edible products. It's clear, 40% of the business right now is in edibles and non-smokables. So you go into a marijuana shop and there are all kinds of chocolate bars and candies and all this other sort of stuff, and it's laced with highly refined and super pure hash oil, which is basically marijuana squeezed down to get out only the purest stuff out of it. Super strong THC. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect are these things that are basically e-cigarettes that again use super purified hash oil, and that's a huge and growing part of the business. So if you think you're going to go out there and, hey, I'm going to buy some bud, there's all this other stuff to buy, and as a result, that some of the businesses that are in the manufacture of that, they literally can't grow fast enough to meet the demand.
All right, well, let's get to phone calls. Paul in Massachusetts, Republican caller, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I have a two-part question for Mr. Smith. And the first part is, where is the marijuana being grown, and who is doing the growing?
In Colorado, if you sell it, you have to grow it yourself. It's a law that is fairly new out there, so there's no separation, and I think the state feels like it has a better control if they know the people are selling it are also growing it. So if you sell it, your responsibility is to grow it yourself.
We'll go to Steve next, Dayton, Ohio, independent caller.
Well, hi there. I spent 20 years smoking marijuana and stopped about 5 or 6 years ago. I feel a whole lot better in every way since I quit. But the real question is, why do we want to smoke it? You put some pot in the pipe, you smoke it, 45 seconds later you're intoxicated, you're that way for 5 hours. And it's like putting sunglasses on that filters the rest of the world. You're not, it affects every part of your body. The question is, why do we want to escape reality so bad? I know why I did, but I don't think it's healthy spiritually, physically, or mentally. And really that's going to be the question. Why do we want to escape?
Okay.
That's exactly the part of the question of the rush to get into this. What's the part of the social contract here? And you talk to law enforcement people, you talk to drug addiction experts, and they say, you know, what we've said now is we're going to take one more intoxicant and put it into the public square and basically say it's okay to use. One of the things they know for sure is that marijuana really does have a serious effect on the brains of young people. If you live in a state like Colorado and you have a 14-year-old kid who says, hey, you know, they say it's legal, how can this be much different than beer, for instance? Well, as it turns out, it's a lot different than beer, especially the effect on a kid's brain. So there's a lot of moving parts to this issue, and it's very interesting who's on the side of legalizing this stuff. Demographically, the younger you are, the more likely you are to say it's a good idea. Right now, Gallup poll says that 58% of the people in the country think that legalization is a very good idea. A lot of libertarians say this is a thing of personal responsibility and personal freedom. Why should we restrict access to it? There's a huge conversation that the country is just now starting to have, and Colorado is the place where, if we want to look and see what's going on, that's the place to look and see it.
And Harry Smith, NBC News correspondent, putting together a special for CNBC. Last night it aired at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll re-air again tonight on CNBC at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Marijuana in America, Colorado pot rush. That's our topic here this morning. And Mary weighs in on this issue of the impact on society, saying social cost, no more stopping cops in neighborhoods, no more violent black market, attention free for destructive hard drug trade.
Yeah, and you know, it's very interesting because when you I think a lot of the people we talk to, in the sense that I get, is decriminalization is a really good idea. Maybe it's baby steps after that leading toward legalization, but I think the decriminalization is important from the standpoint of people whose lives who have been arrested for marijuana possession, and should it be classified as a class 1 drug? There are lots of conversations like that. Should it be decriminalized? Probably, yeah. Beyond that, I think maybe the best idea is to take baby steps. That's just my experience from having been involved in this for the last month or so.
What is happening in Colorado on this issue of criminal and legal issues? Have they faced more problems because of it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We talked to the district attorney in Boulder, for instance, which people say, well, that's the People's Republic of Boulder, and they're all left of who knows what. The district attorney up there is a big law and order guy. The community is a big law and order community. He has the highest conviction rate of any district attorney in the state. But he said when it comes to impaneling a jury for a marijuana case, he says nobody cares. And his sense is that maybe this really is the way to go, as your, I think, last email or tweeter said, was, listen, let's take it out of the hands of a criminal population. Let's make sure that the state has as much regulatory control as possible. And if we can watch it that way and watch how it's distributed, maybe we can not only just decriminalize it, but take it out of the hands of the criminal population. And some people say the criminal population wants to sell marijuana as a gateway drug to get people on other stuff. If you just sell it as a recreational drug, maybe people will use it as people use alcohol. I mean, there's so many. I said over and over again as we were there during that week, I said it's like watching a genie come out of a bottle, and we have no idea what will continue to happen as this genie grows and grows and grows.
Did you look into the impact of this on drug dealers?
Yeah, well, we met a drug dealer in Boulder, as a matter of fact, who said his business is as good as ever. He said the price of the marijuana in the retail stores is so high that he can undercut it easily. So he said his business is just fine. I think maybe the other real stunning thing in all of this, Greta, is just the whole notion that overnight the legal trade in marijuana could be $1 billion business in a state. It's not that big a state. What is it, 2.5 or 3 million people? That's a lot. That's a lot of marijuana in 1 year. $1 billion. That's a lot. And I think, quite honestly, it's we're beating these metaphors to death. But this is really just sort of the tip of the iceberg. The demand for it is really quite substantial.
Yeah, and Boring File Clerk tweets in, is that the bottom line, that legal pot is a boon for the state in terms of tax dollars?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and I think that's what Hickenlooper is saying is, if don't be so tempted that this just on the outside looks so attractive to you, because it's just when Prohibition was lifted in 1933, the country basically said, all those years before when the temperance movement was going on, and we said, this alcohol is bad. It's bad for society. It ruins families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then all those years later, they said, maybe the social contract is worth the trade. We'll take the bad stuff with the benefits of having this intoxicant. So that's what Hickenlooper is talking about. We're legalizing an intoxicant. What the downside is, we're not really in a position to be able to measure yet.
Larry's up next in Elkhart, Indiana, Republican caller. Thanks for hanging on the line. Larry, go ahead.
My question is, what's the legal ramifications for marijuana sales? Because we just had an accident that happened in South Bend, Indiana, where the gentleman that was driving the car was high on marijuana, and that do they have the same response as a bartender selling somebody alcohol and they go out and kill or hurt somebody?
Yeah. You make a really good point, because this is all brand new territory, and that local law enforcement in Colorado is trying to figure out. So if we stop a guy who we think is driving high, the only way you can really find out THC content in somebody's blood is through a blood test. Are you going to be able to say, will you consent to a blood test? The legal ramifications, as you suggest, are can be almost infinite. If the guy is using THC and is determined that he caused this accident, or maybe even killed somebody on the highway, who then backwards in the food chain is responsible? Now, when a bartender and a guy drives, is using it straight over the counter and walks out and kills somebody, there is some responsibility back that way. On the other hand, you're not going to go back to a liquor store and say, well, you sold this guy a bottle of gin and he just drove and killed somebody. And it doesn't work that way. So you pose a very interesting question, because we have no idea where all of this goes, and so that's why, as I say once again, Hickenlooper is saying, stop, slow down, see how this plays out, and maybe as these states decide or not decide how to proceed, they'll have a better roadmap to follow.
Joan emails in with a question about the quality of the pot and whether or not there's some regulation there. Are there any regulations as far as pesticides and herbicides on the plants?
Right. I think some places where advertising is all organic. I think there's a sense out there that organic is better, although it's a lot more difficult to. And I think there actually are some regulations in place, in state regulations in that regard. There's a lot of new testing regulations that are going into effect, so that if you go in and you buy an edible, for instance, and it says it's this percent, THC, that what it says on the label actually has to be backed up through testing. You asked about the businesses that are popping up. That's another business that's popping up is testing centers. And oh, by the way, the stuff that they're selling in the stores out there is many, many, many more times more powerful than the stuff that was around when I was in college, for instance. But that, there were dinosaurs on Earth when I was in college. So.
You touched on it a little bit, but those tasting parties, want to show our viewers from the special that you put together your profile of Jane West.
At a private art gallery in Denver, the cocktail crowd has shelled out $100 each to hobnob over hors d'oeuvres, fine wine, and some locally cultivated bud.
Oh, it's got nice taste. Oh, yeah.
In many of Colorado's more progressive precincts, this is the new normal. Freed from the seedy confines of basements and back rooms, pot is becoming a fixture of polite society.
Everyone brought different samples and they were like trying them, kind of like a wine tasting. This is Jane West. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Jane West is the orchestrator of this soiree.
I put together this idea and this event, and there are 150 people. So clearly there's a market for this, and there are a group of people that want to be consuming cannabis together and having big social parties.
I'm a blue team and I jump on the...
She's a suburban 37-year-old married mother of two and makes no apologies.
I use marijuana, and that's okay.
Harry Smith, what did you make of the Martha Stewart of pot?
One of the reasons we showed that, used that segment was this whole question of, so does Colorado wake up in the first day of January and say it's Stoner Nation? Well, and as you look at the dollars and cents that go along with the amount of sales there, it goes way beyond a sort of stereotyped constituency. There are a lot of people out there from many walks of life who are using it on a fairly consistent basis. Now they're just out of the closet, so to speak. I talked to a colleague here at NBC the other day whose husband was on a business trip in Colorado. They had business meetings in Vail all day. They'd ski all afternoon. Then they'd go down to Breckenridge and buy pot. It's a different world than I think many of us suspect.
What's it like when you're walking around the cities in Colorado? I mean, do you see it everywhere? Do you see the businesses everywhere?
No, there are 150 retail stores right now, recreational sales stores, and oh, by the way, one of the other segments on the show that if people didn't see it last night, as you say, it will be on again tonight. Is each town, each municipality in Colorado can decide on its own if it wants to allow pot sales. So, for instance, Greeley, Colorado, which is a substantial town of over 100,000 people, has said, we want to take a wait-and-see attitude. We don't want that in our town right now. We talked to the police chief, really smart guy, been in uniform for, almost 40 years, and he says, look, I have enough problems with the stuff I have problems with now. Why do I want to introduce the sale of another intoxicant into my community? He said, here are all my fears, some of which we just talked about. He says, we wake up 2 or 3 years from now and my fears are unfounded, that'll be fine. But in the meantime, these are things that I would rather not have to worry about.
Jim in New York, Democratic caller, you're up next.
Yes, good morning. There's a great article in a publication that I doubt anybody from CNBC would ever think about reading, Mother Jones. It's called This Is Your Wilderness on Drugs. And they've given some very interesting statistics about marijuana use and growing in California. They say in California, during growing season, they use over 60 million gallons of water. Also, they say that by growing plants, 4 plants sucks up as much electricity as 29 refrigerators. And they also talk about the damage that's being done to the environment by the way it's being grown in California. Now, I agree that maybe Colorado might get around this, but it's an expensive, it's doing a lot of damage to the environment the way it's being done in California.
Yeah, as it turns out, I actually did see that piece, and there's, because it's being, well, you know, the people the legalizers would say, see, that's why this stuff needs to be legalized. You go out into the wilderness in California or the places where they're growing this stuff, yes, they're using tremendous amounts of pesticides, herbicides, who knows what. The environmental destruction out there is just quite phenomenal, and this is marijuana growth that is outside the law. So the people, the legalizers, were saying that's one more reason to bring it under the, you know, some sort of state jurisdiction, because that way, you know, there are environmental benefits even to legalizing marijuana. You make a very good point, and it's a great piece. If people are interested in this as an issue, just go on Mother Jones. It's a very, very good piece.
Here's a tweet from one of our viewers, Dean, who says, send in the Girl Scouts to sell cookies in front of the stores. They'll make a fortune. But jokes aside, I mean...
Which is what happened last week in San Francisco. You know, a mom had her Girl Scout, her daughter, set up in front of a medical marijuana dispensary, and she sold out 157 boxes in record time. So...
But with jokes aside, I mean,
cute anecdote.
What are these? What are the other industries that are popping up because of what's happening in Colorado?
Well, that's, you know, that is the joke. Well, I mean, that is the joke, by the way, is that, you know, our Frito sales going off the you know, through the roof in Colorado. It's interesting as you look at this, and one of the things that we talked about was this edibles. People go out there, and because the stuff is so powerful, they'll take one of these bars and they'll want to consume the whole thing. And because it's so edible, because it's the stuff that's in it is so powerful, they say take a bite, maybe 2 bites, wait 45 minutes, and then you know, see how you feel. A lot of people are so tempted by it, they just consume the whole thing. You won't talk for 2 days if you eat the whole thing. It's very, very powerful stuff.
And that is because of the hash oil. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but the THC level in hash oil is 80 to 90% versus regular marijuana, which is, you know, in the teens. So what are they? How are they addressing that issue?
Well, you know, it's part of the regulation that we talked about, and, you know, the testing that goes on. If you say this bar has 30% THC, you know, the state is trying to get a handle on making sure that what they sell isn't so super intoxicating. On the other hand, we saw some of, you know, what is being made, and they'll take the hash oil now and they'll make it into like basically a clear sheet, and they chunk it up into little tiny chunks, and they smoke the little tiny chunks, and that's like a super potent kind of THC experience. Listen, I have no idea. I was sitting there, felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants. I'd never seen anything like it. And in these states where this medical marijuana has been around for a couple of years, this is sort of normal stuff. For, you know, guys like me from the provinces, you come in and you say, holy cow, I had no idea.
And the production of hash oil can be dangerous.
Well, especially if you're doing it yourself. The guys with the very sophisticated systems that we looked at, they spend small fortunes on the processing of the machinery for the processing. It's highly proprietary, and as the legalization and the popularity of this stuff moves from state to state to state, what they then do is they sell that system, or at least the licensing for that system, in different states, because you can't transport the stuff over state lines. But the technology, the sophistication of the technology that's involved is really quite astounding. And no, if you want to try that processing yourself, that really is one of those, don't try this at home.
Daniel, Spring Hill, Florida, independent caller.
I'd like to say good morning and thank you for taking my call. As far as manufacturing hash oil, it can be dangerous. Getting in and out of the shower can be dangerous. I'd just like to make that point. But my issue is the federal government. Marijuana is still illegal federally, correct? It's a Schedule I drug, just as heroin.
Yep.
So if I, here in Florida, get a group of people together and we decide to walk on our state legislature and we say, you know, we want prostitution, heroin, and slavery legal. Isn't that a form of, like, secession? Isn't it treason to go directly against the federal law, and then the federal government does nothing?
Harry Smith.
Yeah, listen, I think that's a very interesting question, and as you well know, the federal government said once Colorado had this referendum and said we're going to legalize it, the federal government said we're not going to fight you about this. And just as a digression, one of the other huge issues out there is the banking industry doesn't want to get caught up, because it says I'm not going to do business with a marijuana dealer because the federal government says this stuff is still a Schedule I and it's illegal. And then Eric Holder comes out and says we'll make it easier for you. Then they write up some stuff, pass it along. The banking industry says that's not a high. You've not set the bar high enough. We're still not going to get involved in this. So we have all these crazy loopholes here. And in Colorado, all these marijuana businesses are all cash businesses. So guys are walking into the Western Union office with pillowcases full of money to get money orders so they can pay their utility bills. It's pretty crazy. They're walking in to pay their taxes with briefcases full of cash. It's really quite insane. So you make a good point. Until the federal government says, well, you know, maybe this isn't a Class I drug and maybe we're not going to prosecute it the same way, maybe then that's going to balance out in some way. I'm not so sure it's secession necessarily, but the government, you have you have a federal government and a state government. They're really in opposition right now, at least in terms of pure law.
We're talking with veteran journalist Harry Smith of NBC News about his special for CNBC that aired last night, Marijuana in America, Colorado Pot Rush. If you missed it, it will re-air again tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Judy in Haines City, Florida, Republican caller. Hi, Judy.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning. Go ahead.
I think this is a wrong thing they're trying to do in Florida, and especially when they say it's from God, it grows from the earth. Well, so does oil come out of the ground. Are we supposed to drink that too? I mean, I got a nephew that's been on this stuff for years and years, and I pray every day that God would deliver him. And he is, to me, I think it's a lot of people that I know smoke this. A lot of them have bipolar. They act crazy. And it's just a sad society that we are living in, that we have to stay stoned all the time. I mean, get God in your heart and you'll have a natural high.
Mr. Smith, you were
No
first.
doubt about that. And as we say, we talked to in the special, which re-airs tonight at 8 and then again Friday night at 10. We talked to drug addiction experts, and this is a serious concern that they guess that probably 10% of the people who are exposed to marijuana, like a lot of other intoxicants, will become addicted. And nobody's really, nobody really has a sense that, as a society says, you know what, this is okay that we use this. We were talking with Chris Matthews last night, and he says, I have a feeling when we wake up in a couple of years from now, the state of Colorado is going to be a lot less ambitious. Is it insidious or is it innocent? I'm not so sure it's one or the other or someplace in between.
That caller was from Florida, saying that she disagrees with what they're doing there. As you mentioned, the front page of the New York Times this morning says that at least 14 states, including Florida, where an initiative has already qualified for the ballot, are considering new medical marijuana laws this year. And according to the Marijuana Policy Project, which supports legalization, and 12 states in the District of Columbia are contemplating decriminalization of marijuana. Let's go to Dorothy in Hampton, Virginia. Democratic caller. Hi, Dorothy.
Good morning, America. I would like for Mr. Smith to give statistics on the difference between domestic violence of alcoholics and the people that smoke marijuana. I would rather be in a room of marijuana smokers than to be in a room with people that drink alcohol, because you can believe. And if you got an uncle or an aunt or somebody in that room, they all, if they're in there more than 2 hours, there's going to be a conflict. You get people who smoke marijuana, they gonna sit there, they going to laugh, they going to eat, and they going to enjoy themselves. Now, did you take a statistic on who beats their wife when they drunk and who kill people when they drunk? Did you take a statistic of that? Please answer.
Yeah, no, listen, there is no question. I don't have a statistic per se, but that's one of the big arguments. And you know, when people measure alcohol and marijuana right next to each other, that's one of the big arguments of the legalizers. They say, you know, people who use alcohol, for a lot of people, it makes it makes them belligerent. It makes them it brings out violent behavior. And as we say, back in 1933, when we said we're going to start using this again, we said in our social contract that that's a cost that we're going to agree that's somehow palatable as long as we're going to legalize it again. So for the legalizers, that's one of their big arguments, is they say, you know what, there's nobody, the cops aren't being called to domestic violence disputes because, you know, somebody got stoned. It's and as you really talk to like law enforcement people, they say, well, a lot of people who are drinking and getting stoned at the same time. It's not as cut and dried or black and white as that, but I think the caller makes a pretty good point. You get really stoned, you're probably going to fall asleep. You're probably not going to be beating anybody up.
Here's a tweet from one of our viewers, Dallas, who wants to know, does Colorado tax marijuana like cigarettes?
Oh my God, the tax on the legal stuff, on the recreational stuff, I think it is about 36%. And what do they say? They think the tax revenues for the state, is it in the first fiscal year in this, or just even in this year alone, will be over $100 million. So what do they say, $136 million? It's crazy. It's super high taxed.
Jeff in Spencer, West Virginia.
And oh, by the way, that's the other part of this thing is, and nobody's saying, oh, hey, I'm sorry. You can see that it's not stopping anybody from buying this stuff.
Jeff in Spencer, West Virginia, independent caller. Go ahead, Jeff.
For full disclosure, I was a big toker for years. I quit about 14 years ago when my son came along, and we used to call it nature's Prozac. But
yeah.
There's another side to this. Our founding fathers, you know, notoriously had fields of marijuana. It's in their farm journals, and they grew it for different reasons. I'm sure they smoked it, you know, a little bit, but there's another business part that can come out of this. The fibers of marijuana, the actual plant, not the bud, are very strong.
Hemp.
You can make clothes.
Hemp.
Yeah, you can make clothes, you can make paper for books. There's a wide range of stuff you can use for this. And it seems to me that this could actually span out into, you know, maybe some stoners say, hey, man, let's start making T-shirts. And they get a little co-op going and making it this way. I mean, it seems to me, this could be a little bit more money than just the tax revenue that comes from it.
Yeah. No, the hemp industry is growing by leaps and bounds, and those of us of a certain age will remember that, you know, if we grew up in rural areas or spent time in rural areas, this stuff was growing wild all over the country all through the 60s because, especially during World War II, tons and tons and tons and tons of hemp was grown all over the country. It's a marijuana plant that without the THC in it, basically. And hemp was used, as our caller suggests, for fabrics, for rope, that makes super strong rope. And the hemp industry is making a comeback even as we speak.
Harry Smith, what's a pot tour?
Well, you pay a certain amount of money, and you've already signed up for one, I think. No, I'm just joking. Just trying to see what we can do on C-SPAN, just to see if we could get a laugh. What you do is you go online, you type in pot tour, and there are all these companies in Colorado. You pay a certain amount of money, they'll put you up in a beautiful hotel. You can get in a limousine with a tour guide. The tour guide will, have different kinds of samples. You'll go to a grow, you'll go to a shop, you go to a place where they make the edibles, and you'll get a full-blown introduction, as it were, to what it's like to be around legal marijuana. We talked to a couple of people on a tour, and it was they were very, very happy to be there.
Harry Smith with NBC News, the special for CNBC, Marijuana in America, Colorado Pot Rush, re-airs tonight and on Friday as well. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Now, live coverage of the House. They're coming in for their legislative session. We'll be back tomorrow morning.